What's about to happen might shock you. Now, I'm not being dramatic. We have a lot of news coming in the market for this upcoming week of May 26th. Let's break down exactly where you need to be focusing your effort in order to get the best opportunity. So first, let's begin. We're going to look at the economic calendar, and we can see that we have Powell speaking right ahead of the Sunday open for the week. This is an important thing to note because this might lead us to have a gap in either direction. Now, I'll break down exactly where we can look for opportunity based on the chart because we don't want to be just entering blindly because price is moving. Now, real quick, looking at the rest of the week, we can see that you got durable good orders right here. You have FOMC minutes, which is somewhat relevant, but it's not exactly going to be a rate decision, obviously. You have preliminary GDP right here, PC as well, penny home sales, and then consumer sentiment. So you have a decent array of economic drivers. These events can inject volatility into the market and give you either opportunity to prepare for that to happen or simply give you a reason to exit the trade, depending on what you trade on, of course. Now, let's get into the charts. We're going to look directly at NASDAQ, and we're going to get into a little bit of ES as well today. Keep it nice, short, and sweet for you guys on this fine Saturday afternoon. Now, NASDAQ, we saw a bit of a retracement into the weekly range. This wasn't terribly surprising. Yes, we did note that there could be upside here. However, the strong close right here, the close at highs and then that immediate failure above prior day high really shifted my bias to look for lower back to this daily fair value gap. That's what I was thinking. The delivery on this was quite choppy. I will admit it was very choppy on the way down. However, it did reach that final target that was in mind. Now, what can we expect from here? Well, we're at a bit of a junction, right? We can either look to make a higher low right here to continue back to all-time highs by sometime in June, which I do believe is possible. However, we can also see a deeper decline. So that is a very real possibility. We can see that price might want to continue through prior day low. This is a 50% close, give or take. I'm not too sold on it being extremely strong. Now, on the other hand, if we did close above prior day low, my opinion would be slightly different. But as it states right now, we are just looking at an inside week for the most part with a failure above prior day high or prior week high rather. Now, with this level in mind, right, we look at the prior week high. I want to see how we're going to trade initially versus this weekly range, right? Are we going to sweep one direction and go the other way or not? Because we do have a weekly fair value gap down here as a result of this. And if we do test this as a support, we can maybe look to form an outside week to break back towards all-time highs. I do believe that would be the case. So maybe weakness into the front of the week and then rally into the end of the week. There we are. Change that color a little bit. But yeah, you can see that we'd want to see a bit of a decline first, then maybe a rally. That's my general thought process. Now, what does this look like on the daily chart? Well, it would be simply, number one, we want to make sure that we're outside of this Friday range before we engage. We do not want to be in this black candle right here when we're trying to get involved in the market. I do believe our best opportunities will rely on either a prior day low or prior day high being in play. And if we do happen to gap out of one of these, we could look for the gap fill, or if we gap above here, maybe the prior day high failure back there. Now, why do I suspect a gap on this Sunday? Well, Powell speaking on a Sunday, not terribly typical, doesn't happen every week. So when you see something like that happen in the market, it tells you that there's likely going to be increased participation from either funds, algos, high frequency trading protocols. There's going to be something involved. There's going to be people involved in the market because the word is being said by the guy. Anytime you get a reason to move price, you'll see it happen. So NQ, to keep it real simple, into the front of the week, I want to see some sort of resolution of this inside. Essentially, I want to see a break of this previous day candle. If we end up inside of here, then it will look for the inside day break. So our downside targets will obviously be the fill of the gap at 20,000. Make this really easy for you. You have 20,000 right here. And if you look to the left, we also have this fair value gap right here. So these are really my two next reference points to the either upside or downside. It's going to depend on the first move. So if we can see weakness into the front half of the week, we could potentially look to close higher, which I'd be okay with. I'd like a sweep of prior day low to get involved. That's what my game plan would be. So we gap down, potentially fill that gap. Vice versa, if we gap up, then potentially look to move lower to fill this gap right here, and then look to maybe fill in that imbalance. So with those two levels and directional plays in mind, wait on the first move. Don't be the first person in the trade. Wait to see if there's going to be some sort of gap like we're assuming there might be. And then from there, we'll look to get involved in the trade. Now, I do want to pace myself this week. I do think it's easy in this market to think that volatility is always high. However, volatility has been clinching up since we've started talking in these weekly updates, we've seen that volatility has dropped from VIX up in the 50s, where we talked about this being a point of where it declines, to now seeing as low as, what do we have here? 20s, starting to rise again. Now the question is, do we get back above 30? If we do, then we can expect more of that anytime market kind of trading. But anytime volatility crushes itself like this, down in the 20s, you got to be real careful with the fake moves, the failed breakouts, and the consolidations of death. We saw a lot of that this week. Now, looking over at the sister of NQ, we're going to look at ES. Very similar setup. I mean, is it forming a higher low, or is it simply just failing this breakout, right? Those are your two options. I do think the draw liquidity is really high, or at the highs rather, is really clear. With that target, I do think it's a reasonable assumption to look for all-time highs at some point next 6 weeks max. However, it really depends on how this week develops. I don't have a crystal ball, unfortunately, but we do see that this is an inside week. This isn't historically the strongest indication when you fail above prior week high, like we talked about on the NASDAQ example. However, anything can really happen. We do have a lot of news. We do have a lot of developments still within that headline-driven market, so expect the unexpected, to say the least. I do think that the reasonable approach to all-time highs, I do think that is the path of least resistance. However, I don't think we need to necessarily just go there in one candle. We might need to pull back a little bit. It might put our plan on hiatus for a bit, maybe a little bit of a delay, but we can still look to get involved with the markets. So I'm going to look at a few other names just to kind of keep us on the loop on some of the bigger high beta names in the market. Take a glance at Amazon. Yeah, nothing too exciting here. It's really just like a higher low forming, mirroring the market very well. You have Apple as well. Yeah, Apple's weak based on those headlines, potentially talk about Apple with tariffs. So you do see some sort of headline driven stuff. This doesn't really bode too well for Apple. This is kind of rounding over. You'd want to see some stronger momentum here. This is just a lot of failure swings, a lot of pushes, and just going nowhere. So this chart's kind of really disintegrating, if you will. It's degrading for sure, deteriorating. I would say that this is going to have a heavy influence on the market. However, we can look at some other risk assets just as general barometer. We can see that Bitcoin is pushing. Can't really complain there. Look at gold really quick. Gold's starting to pick up again. So maybe we're ready to see another downturn in the market. I would like to think that is a reasonable assumption. And the chart itself is kind of indicating that as well. So you look at correlated markets and you look at the chart itself, you look at the news drivers involved, and then you start to extrapolate what is a reasonable assumption. Now, just because a target's clear doesn't mean that it has to go there immediately. We can trade back in here, trade here, trade here. We can take some time as things develop, as this thing starts to fade, right? Who says this isn't just a sweep above here to then target those lows? I don't think any trader is ready for that. That would be one of the craziest charts I've ever seen in my entire life. Doesn't mean it's not possible. However, we do need to just look at what is the next logical move. And for us, that's going to be really based on the daily, using the levels that we indicated. Back to our baby NASDAQ, we can see, back to 20K if we do break that prior day range. If we fail above the prior day range, that would be a good indication as well. So those are the levels that I'll be watching this week. Just keeping it short and sweet for you guys. If you like this type of content, leave a like, comment, share, subscribe. As always, stay tuned. Till next time, take care.